Google is incorporating Core Web Vitals into its ranking algorithm. That means you're going to have to start taking page speed a lot more seriously in the near future. So in today's episode, we're going to be breaking down exactly what Core Web Vitals are and how you can fix them on your site. We're releasing this show this week because we've just launched our new Core Web Vitals blueprint. And in this course, we're going to take a really slow site and get it to 100, which is the maximum score you can get on the PageSpeed Insights tool. Now, along the way, Gael's going to show you step by step exactly how to do that, all the tools, all the settings, all the processes that he uses to get there. Plus, he's also mapped out every single error message you can get in the PageSpeed Insights tool, and he's mapped out a step-by-step solution for that. This course is available at the time this podcast goes live, but only for the next 3 days or so. Plus, we have a special 75% discount offer going on during that time. So if you want to grab it, this is absolutely the best time to do so. You can head on over to authorityhacker.com/core web vitals and you can get access today. This comes with a 30-day money-back guarantee, and we've negotiated discounts to all of the tools we recommend in the course as well. This is the biggest and most complete resource on Core Web Vitals available anywhere online. So go check it out right now. Welcome back to the Authority Hacker podcast. I'm Mark. I'm here today with my co-founder, Gael. And today we are going to be talking about Core Web Vitals. Now, as someone who's not very technical, and to be honest, I leave most of the technical stuff to Gael, Core Web Vitals are kind of intimidating for me. There's a lot of technical terms and terminology and things, parts of the website which I've never even touched before, which have to be tweaked. So today I'm going to be interviewing Gael in order to get some plain English answers so someone like me can understand. But first,
I mean, plain English from a French person, right?
Exactly.
So it's going to be complicated.
You're basically a native English speaker now. You use English more than French.
Yeah.
But wait. I have one question. How's it going, Gael? I've always wanted to do that.
I don't know. How are we doing? We haven't done a podcast for a long time. So it's like, is this like some undergoing authority hacker drama that people are getting excited about?
It's a real big story. No, it's not. So there's three things going on. We're a little bit burnt out. So we were doing some more guest interviews. You were on vacation for a bit. And we're preparing a few other bits and pieces of work. And it all just kind of ended up there being like 3 interviews in a row. But we're back now, and we'll be back in a couple of weeks again with some more Mark and Gael action. So if you like our stuff, you got more of that to look forward to.
If you like the interviews, sorry guys.
But we've got some more guests lined up a little later in the year as well.
I've actually learned quite a bit of stuff on like that John Dijkstra interview, for example. So I kind of want to do more like selfishly interviews, just because it allows me to like think about building sites in different terms, and people do things differently and so on. And so I definitely want to do more interviews.
It's really cool. Like you get to ask people like their deepest, darkest secrets about their business, and they just tell you. It's great. It's like free mentoring almost, you know?
I enjoy it. I know that some interviews definitely do a lot worse than others, but I think it's nice to not just get our perspective, like as interesting as it may be, to bring other people and to kind of like clash the visions and get something out of it. So yeah, I do enjoy them. Actually, I don't think they're going away. I do think there will be more interviews this year overall than last year. But anyway, today we're talking about Core Web Vitals. And basically, I'm a guest, so you go ahead and you ask the questions, right?
So I'm not going to ask you to tell the audience about yourself because no one cares. Let's just get straight into it.
Hi.
Core Web Vitals. Why should I care about them? Like we've talked about site speed before, and you've said it's kind of a thing, but don't focus too much on it. Why is Core Web Vitals different?
I mean, page speed officially was a ranking factor, at least on mobile, according to Google. And now they're kind of refining that into Core Web Vitals is what we're going to be looking at. And Core Web Vitals is not page speed. It's like how some parts of your site loads and some things load. And so there's 3 main metrics, right? There's largest contentful pane, there is first input delay, and there's cumulative layout shift. I'm sure we're going to go over this But basically, Google has this new thing called like page experience algorithm. And within this page experience algorithm, which you can find in your webmaster's console, so you have reports for that in there, there is Core Web Vitals, which is what they are introducing in the ranking algorithm recently. And well, it's kind of like most things Google has initially. I believe that, it's like a lot of people love page speed and all that stuff because it's easy. You put URL, you get a score, and you just change something and you get another score, and then you kind of improve on that. I still believe that if you haven't sorted content and links on your site, you should probably focus on that. I still believe that I would rather have a site that has content sorted out than page speed sorted out, etc. So like, we're releasing a new blueprint right now, but I'm not going to like change my stance on this because we're releasing a new blueprint. But we should also not be forbidden from talking about these topics that are becoming increasingly important because there is the core of the business that people need to take care about. And we have done training for these other things in the Authority Site system, in Authority Hacker Pro, etc. So it was an interesting thing to go over that. And historically, we've been focusing mostly on building sites out of convenience for building them and making them easy to build. And now I was like, okay, how much of this are we going to have to sacrifice so that we can also match all this new Core Web Vital stuff? And that was kind of like the challenge for me. It was quite interesting to go for that.
So essentially, it's a sub part of PageSpeed.
Yeah.
It's just how they're defining certain aspects of it. And they're incorporating that into the algorithm. We don't know how big of a factor it's going to be. Would it be fair to say that in our niche, in IM, where everyone's probably going to be doing this, it's something you should probably be doing sooner rather than later, whereas with less tech savvy webmasters or site owners, it's maybe something it's not quite so urgent.
Yeah, for all the people who listen and have a paintball site, for example, they don't need to probably focus on this as much because it's still the same shitty size ranking on top. So we definitely haven't sparked that leash on fire. But yeah, in like more competitive niches, if you're in CBD, if you're in anything finance, if you are in hosting and like all the very, very cutthroat
where everyone else is doing like really strong SEO and seeking that extra 1% advantage over all the competitors.
Yeah.
Basically.
So I like to compare this to when Google introduced HTTPS as a ranking factor. So it's like, at the beginning, most people didn't have that. And then it was like, do it if you want. Most people didn't switch to HTTPS and their rankings shoot up. But eventually now, if you don't have HTTPS, you're the outlier. And it's going to, you don't see sites without HTTPS rankings on top of Google now. So it's kind of like, well, it is something that you need to do now if you want to show up on Google, at least if you're looking on the correlation level. It's a very, very high correlation to have HTTPS and ranking higher. And I think even Brian Dean did some case studies. We did as well, actually, where we saw that the higher the ranking on Google, the higher percentage of people have HTTPS. And I can see Core Web Vitals being one of these things where it's like, you won't necessarily jump up in rankings like crazy, but if you don't have it, you will not rank eventually when everyone else has it. So it's kind of one of these things you're going to have to adapt. My personal opinion is that Google is doing that more selfishly than they're doing this for the user. Reason is if your site loads faster and just takes less data to load, it's going to cost them less to crawl the internet, which in the end saves them large electricity bills, which in the end also allows them to say they're a greener company, which is something that, they have to do with all these government goals of reducing carbon emissions, etc. So it's an easy way to just pass on the bill to the website owners and then eventually say they are a greener company and that overall they made the internet greener. But if you're a website owner, it doesn't matter really why Google does it. What matters is that eventually, it's going to be like HTTPS, and you're going to be Googling stuff, and eventually everyone will pass Core Web Vitals on top of subs. If you don't pass it, it's much less likely you will show up higher. So that's kind of like that. Rather than a solution to your business, it's something that you're just going to have to do, kind of like a new norm that you have to go through when these things happen in real life.
What's the time frame on this in terms of when's it becoming a ranking factor?
So if you go on the Google Web Dev tool, they actually have a little ribbon. I actually put that screenshot on the sales page for the Core Web Vitals blueprint that says it's rolling out all the way through August. So I think from the limited information, either Google's gonna, the Google search liaison is gonna come and tweet and be like, hey, we're done rolling this out, or you can assume it's going to be done by the end of August. I don't know how they're rolling it out, if it's per language, per country, per niche or whatever, but it is currently rolling out and it should be done sometime in August.
And I would say that even though we have a vested interest in sort of like selling people this course, like I don't want to kind of overstate that it's not something that you have to go and do tomorrow. Otherwise, by the end of August, you're going to lose all your rankings. It's probably going to be, a much more longer term gradual phase in.
And equally, if you don't, when you solve it, it's not going to shoot up all your rankings if your content is shit and if you don't have links as well, right? So it's like, but it's something that you're going to have to address. You're going to have to address that in the next few months, and you're going to at least, John Mueller came out in an interview, like on the Webmaster office hours type stuff. And he just said, basically, if you, like in Webmaster's Console, there's this report where they put like poor, needs improvement, and good, basically. And he said you will have an effect on your ranking if you're in the poor bucket, right? But if you're still in a need improvement, you should not, going from need improvement to good doesn't seem to yield effects based on what he said. Like it doesn't seem to improve your rankings, but going from poor to need improvement, actually it's something that could affect your rankings according to Google themselves. Yeah. So yeah, if you're in this poor bucket, and a lot of people are actually, it's quite harsh core Web Vitals.
That's true, but
it could affect your rankings.
That's true, but from what I've seen, at least from what you've been doing and what people who've been beta testing our course on have been doing, getting from bad to okay or needs improvement is actually quite easy. It's getting like to 100. Like the really top of the top score is quite
the
challenging.
hardest is going from like 95 to 100. Like this one is like it's like I did it in the blueprint because obviously people want to see me do it, etc. But let's be honest, for you to get real life results, all you need to do is to get to the acceptable level, basically.
So for the average site owner out there, this is actually initially probably a smaller and easier to implement thing than they probably realize. Okay, we'll talk about some.
They could raise the bar over time, right?
I agree. That's probably likely to happen. And we'll talk about some of the ways people can improve their score in just a sec. But Google has this PageSpeed Insights tester tool. What exactly is that showing us? You mentioned cumulative layout shift and a few other things. Tell us about this.
Yeah. I mean, it shows us a lot of stuff, right? It's like it shows you all these scores. Like you get this general score that everyone's just looking at, and it just gives you a score from 0 to 100, 100 and 0 being very rare, but you're usually somewhere in between. I mean, I'm not going to go through all the metrics because that's pretty long, but if you care about core Web Vitals, you care about 3 metrics, you care about largest content paint, content or contentful, I can't remember.
Contentful.
First input delay and cumulative layout shift, right? And so these are core Web Vitals per Google's thing. So largest contentful paint is Google picking an element on your page and be like, okay, that's the thing that takes the most real estate above the fold when the page is loading. So I'm going to look at that one element and I'm going to look at how quickly it's showing up, right? That's basically what Google's doing. And so on all your pages, they can pick a different one, and they also pick a different one based on whether it's a mobile or desktop rendering, which is why in the PageSpeed Insight, you will get different scores for mobile and desktop. Well, desktop is usually quite easy to improve. Mobile is the more challenging one, which is why in a blueprint, we focus on mobile so that we take the most difficult one, and usually desktop gets to 100. So largest contentful paint can be different things. It can be your H1, pretty frequent. It can be your featured image, for example, also pretty frequent. On Notary Hacker, we have the blog post with like kind of like the background blue and the grid. It actually took the image of the grid as the largest contentful paint. And so it's going to look at how quickly this loads. But it's quite of a tricky one because let's say it takes your featured image and you like, I tried to improve my page speed. I did lazy loading on my images. Well, guess what happens? Your images load last, including your featured image. Therefore, you get a poor largest contentful paint score because you lazy loaded your images. And so you need to, for example, when you get to optimize that, if you keep an image as your largest contentful paint, you need to exclude that image from the lazy loading so that it loads, and sometimes even prefetch it. So it actually like starts loading before everything else so that you get, you sort that score out. So that's where, for example, Core Web Vital differs from like classic page speed optimization stuff and just installing a plugin and not thinking about it. Like you need to put to run this test and understand it and eventually optimize against that. So that's largest contentful paint. And first input delay is basically how quickly does the page react from the moment it starts loading to the moment where I can interact with it. So when I can click on a button or a link or something, and then when I click on the link, it actually does it. Because sometimes, when the page is still loading, you click on the link and it still doesn't do it, and you have to click again, etc. So it's really like, how long does that take? And usually that's benchmarked against like how long does it take to load all the scripts like JavaScript, etc. by the time the browser starts actually taking what you're doing with this. And then the interesting with first input delay is actually it's in the PageSpeed Insight tool, you have this field data and you have the lab data that you're going to be looking at when you look at the result. The field data is actually an average of 28 days. So people, a lot of the time, they try to optimize their site and they're like, oh, the metrics are not moving, it's not improving. Well, that's because that's the average of the last 28 days. So even if you improved in the last 5 minutes, it's not going to change that number because you need 28 days for this to change. But what is interesting is you will get this first input delay in the field data, but you will not get it in the lab data, which is the real-time one. So when you retest your page and you change something, you will see these numbers change, right? So actually, the way you optimize first input delay using the lab data is you take a proxy metric called total blocking time, which is kind of the same. It's just like how long. It's not exactly the same, but kind of, basically. It's hard to explain exactly. It's just like how long it waits until it executes some of the scripts, etc. And it's a good enough metric to start optimizing against it, but eventually you kind of have to keep an eye when you fix your core web vitals. So you go back to your 28-day average and you actually get the actual metric people care about. So that is first input delay. And then cumulative layout shift is how unstable your page is when it loads. So you've been on that page before, like on CNN or something, and you load an article and you start wanting to click on a button or something on the menu, and then you click and bam, there's an ad that loads, and then you just end up clicking on a Viagra ad.
I hate that so much. It's like, it tends to be in the UK, all these local newspapers have it, and they'll have really you clickbaity story on social media, you click, and you have to scroll through all this shit to find the actual information. And then you try and click on the link there or play the video, and then it's just boom, I'm clicking on an ad to, I don't know, buy some new bed sheets or whatever. What?
Exactly. So that's cumulative layout shift. So Google's looking at how stable your page is while it's loading. And there's ways to tell the browser to reserve the space for the ads, for example, so that it doesn't move around the text. It just puts a blank space. And then when it comes the time to load the ad, because you will load it asynchronously so that it doesn't slow down the content from loading and you get a good page speed score. It doesn't create this crazy instability of your page when it's loading. So that's basically the 3 core web vitals. It's the holy trinity: largest contentful paint, first input delay, cumulative layout shift. And that's slightly different from just what is my page speed score, etc. So you can have a high page speed score and still have some red metrics in core web vitals.
Are traditional page speed scores what is it, time to first byte and these kind of things still a factor for this, or does it just not matter at all?
A little bit. For example, largest contentful paint will rely on the time to first byte will influence largest contentful paint, for example.
Because so it's a proxy metric for the other one. You have to.
It's not even a proxy metric, but you can then, when you get more granular, when you're I want to improve my largest contentful paint, then you can go back to okay, well, if everything just started loading, instead of taking 300 milliseconds to start loading, it takes 30. Then all of my metrics just move back by 270, and therefore I might get green on some of the other stuff,
Okay, makes sense.
But for example, cumulative layout shift is not really affected at all by time to first byte, because really what matters is how shaky your page is. So it's some is not,
Okay, so on some of our sites that you've actually been through and implemented all this stuff, which we're about to talk about, we have really, really high scores. Not so much, though, on Authority Hacker. Why is that?
First of all, Authority Hacker is a complex site. It's I can't just go and quick fix it. Most of the sites I've done in a day, right? So, in the FAQ on the sales page, we're a week, but it's quite generous. If someone's on it, I can do that in a day. I can do that in half a day, really, not even at this point. But on a bigger site, obviously, you've got to be more careful. If you do some stupid stuff, you could be paying with your rankings, etc. So it does take more time to transition bigger sites. And Authority Hacker has a lot of things like sales pages, landing pages, etc., which would need a decent degree of rebuild in terms of template to re-optimize these things. So we'll talk probably about themes, etc., a little bit later, and page builders. But I want to move Authority Hacker out of Elementor completely, and that is the one step that will take a lot of time. But I don't really want to do the other things until I've done kind of like the basics. It's kind of like, even in the blueprint, I go on the most basic level. So we start with like, okay, let's look at your hosting. Then let's look at your hosting setup, like then settings rather. Then let's look at your theme. Then let's look at your page builder. Then let's look at how you load your file. Like we kind of like go back up, and it's kind of the correct way of doing this because it's like otherwise like if you optimize, let's say you optimize your scripts the way your JavaScript loads, etc. But then you change some stuff, like you change your theme, for example. Well, it's different files, so you kind of have to go back and do it again, right? Okay. And it's like
so there's an order that you have to do this in, basically.
Yeah, I mean, in order to not be wasteful with your time, it's better to do that. And so I'm just willing to, take a hit initially and then do it properly eventually. It's kind of the way we do things. And so that's why we do that. I did attempt to make the Core Web Vitals sales page past Core Web Vitals just because it was like, I feel like it makes sense when you're selling a course to actually like execute what you teach in the course, at least on the sales page.
Ironically, Google's own PageSpeed tools Insights
it doesn't pass,
tester page doesn't pass it. So yeah,
no, it doesn't. So yeah, a lot of Google's properties don't pass actually. I mean, most of YouTube doesn't pass, etc. Like, it's interesting to see that Google's forcing it on people, but doesn't seem to have any consequence on their own companies.
So does
but yeah, but on bigger sites it takes more time, right? We have beta testers as well that are doing it on bigger sites, and they did get quite a lot of improvement. Like Josh took his site from like 20 something to 70 plus in a PageSpeed tool already by doing some of the stuff, but he couldn't because some of these bigger things take more time.
He has thousands of articles, gets millions of traffic. So
yeah, exactly.
It's a bit more.
We're
complex.
Talking big sites, and it's always like that, right?
In the past, we've used Nitropack to improve the speed of Authority.
We still use it right now.
Yeah. How does that help your Core Web Vitals at all, or is it something completely separate?
Yeah, it does. It helps your Core Web Vitals quite a bit. I mean, right now, like the sales page is running on Nitropack, for example. It is doing quite a bit of work. The problem with Nitropack is they do it based on your page views now, and it's freaking expensive. So it's worth it if you have more time than money, and you can't be bothered with dabbling with all that stuff. Like Nitropack is the 80-20 basically. But
just to interject there, if you do want a discount on Nitropack, if you use the coupon AuthorityHacker10, you can get a 10% discount.
Yeah, it is expensive, but it does a lot of the stuff. The problem is there's not a lot of options to tweak it, etc. And so you will probably not get to a perfect score. And yeah, it gets expensive. And the setup we have in the blueprint is a lot cheaper. I would say like 4 times cheaper or something like that. And the more page views you have, the cheaper it gets because we use like much cheaper CDNs, etc. And so it's not really metered. It is metered by bandwidth a little bit, your CDN, but it's so cheap that it's nowhere close. And so like the more traffic you have, for the guys who have big traffic in HPro, etc., Nitropack is an expensive one. It works on Authority Hacker because we're in a niche where it's not a huge traffic niche. It's a pretty profitable niche, let's be honest. And so like it kind of makes economical sense here. But if you have like a gardening site or something, it's a bit more complicated because you tend to have a lot of traffic and make a lot less per visitor. And so you would pay a lot more for Nitropack and make less per visitor than we do. So I am going to move actually Authority Hacker to that setup that I do in the blueprint. It's just that, again, I need to do these basic things that are quite time consuming first, actually.
Okay. So let's go into some of the non-Nitropack methods for improving things. You mentioned start with your hosting. Do you just flat out move to a faster host? Like, how do you know which one? Like, what's the process? What do you need to look for here, basically?
I mean, it's kind of like the usual, you get what you pay for. But there's obviously better value for money here and there. And that's what we've done. I've actually tried like quite a few hosting solutions before I settled for. We went for Cloudways, DigitalOcean Premium. That's the one. It's a brand new one, actually.
What does that mean? Because Cloudways and DigitalOcean are two companies. Like, what's the relationship?
So Cloudways is the hosting provider. They give you an interface. Basically, they give you everything you would expect from a host. Launch a new site and like create a staging and all that stuff. While DigitalOcean is just a hard, server provider, right? They just have like server racks around the world, and they just focus on the hardware and on connecting them to really fast internet, and you do whatever you want with it. So, if you use like apps like Asana or Notion, etc., they probably run on things like, they probably run on Amazon, but it's kind of the same thing as DigitalOcean, So Cloudways resells you their services, but with a proper interface, so you don't have to go through the terminal on your computer and do things like update the server software. That is not WordPress. That's like the lower level stuff, etc. So it's like it does that for you. It's kind of like a serviced version. It does cost more, but not that much more. And it's just like, it just avoids so much hassle that it's worth the trade-off here. And you get a support, for example. There's no support in DigitalOcean, right? I mean, if you have a problem with your WordPress site, it's like, figure it out. They will not assist you on WordPress issues, for example, whereas Cloudways will. The reason we switch is mostly because, well, when you are on the cheap hosting, so I'm thinking like SiteGround, even WPX hosting, etc., which a lot of people like, you are sharing your server with a lot of people who install whatever plugin they want, and it uses a lot of resources. These hosts, have ways to like limit how much resources your neighbors are going to be using, but eventually you're just putting a lot of sites on one server, and the more sites they put per server, the more profit they make. It's pretty simple, right? It's just like, it's kind of like the plane, right? It's like if they cram all the seats together, well, they put more people, they make more money. And then if you go in business class or in Premier, then it's like you get a lot more legroom. Exactly, you get a lot more legroom, etc. It's kind of the same analogy here. I know you hate my analogies, but I think this is okay.
So it's a better one, maybe like taking the bus or having your own car.
Yeah, pretty much.
Okay,
but like that's nice because you still get. It's not really like having your own car because you still get the meals, etc. because you get the service from Cloudways,
Okay.
So you do get the service layer, but you do get. It's okay. I mean, it's like we own Kinsta right now on a lot of our sites. Kinsta is better for support. I'm not gonna really good
support. I'm super impressed with them.
I'm not gonna cut and candy it. But on Kinsta, you're still sharing servers, right? And I have moved some sites from Kinsta to Cloudways, and I have had better performances on Cloudways. Even though Kinsta, you go on their site and they're gonna tell you they're on Google Cloud, In the end, it depends how many sites they put on the server, and even the best server, if you put 1,000 sites on it, it's still gonna be slow, right? So it's not slow, Kinsta, but it's slower than Cloudways. And if you are seeking for performance, I feel Cloudways is a better deal. It's also much cheaper while being faster. So that's when I said like you can find good values for money, but you trade in service, you get a little bit less service, but it's still on par with most hosts. It's just that Kinsta is a really good service.
And what kind of results can people expect just from moving host?
From one of the sites I moved, I'm trying to remember. I think it went from like 50 to like 65 or 70, something like this. Like on if I give like the mobile PageSpeed score, it's just easier to just give a single number, right? It's like. Some stuff is better, but overall, yeah, it's like it did improve by like 15, 20 points. Moving from SiteGround to moving to Cloudways. So that's pretty good actually. It's not everything, and you need to know how to set it up as well. Like you need to know how to set up the options, etc. It is a bit techy for complete beginners, which is why I'm still happy to recommend SiteGround for beginners. It's just easier. And if people fuck up with their cache settings, etc., it can really be damaging to your site. So it is a bit more techy, but it's still manageable for most people, I would say. So it's the balance, of value, of speed, and of ease of use, basically.
Okay. So a couple of weeks ago, you sent out an email to our subscribers, and I believe the title was something like "I'm done with Elementor." Tell us about that, and was that related to Core Web Vitals?
Yeah, I mean that's as I was doing the Core Web Vitals blueprint. So it's like the one thing that kind of like made me bulge, I mean, a lot of people were like, page builders load a lot of shit on your page, it's extra. But I was like, man, it just makes it easier. If I want to make an opt-in page, a landing page, a sales page, it's just like, sometimes it's quite difficult to do even on Gutenberg as it is, right? But the game has changed quite a bit as GeneratePress has released the new GeneratePress 3.0 actually, which has kind of a theme builder in there. So it's not as nice as a page builder to use, but the trade-off is you get very, very good performances while still having the capabilities close enough to what you used to have with Elementor theme builder. So you gain a lot in performance and you lose a chunk, but not something manageable in usability, basically.
Question. Is it something that I could make a page on?
I think you would struggle at first.
Okay.
Which is why I made videos. So watch the videos. But it's so the reason it's difficult is because everyone who has used Gutenberg knows what it looks like, right? You have these little plus buttons and you add stuff, etc. It looks like that when you build the page, right? And it's not looking like the page you have. The width of the element is not what it's going to be looking like on the page, etc. So you need to mentally remember how wide the element is and how much stuff you're gonna do. You're still gonna have to like refresh and then go back to your preview and recheck, etc. So it's not as nice as it would be if you did this directly on a page builder that shows you the front end of your site and exactly how it's going to look like. And for a lot of people who have never built websites, I think it's something that they could learn, but it's going to be a hard learn, and I think a lot of people are going to give up. From my experience teaching a lot of beginners through the authority site system, etc. And so that's also why I don't change my recommendation for beginners, because, as I said, it's better to sort out your content and links than go for like perfect performances. And I think that's what these other solutions allow you to do. It allows you to like not worry too much about the design and just get going with your content and links. And case in point, we have sites that are still in Elementor. We have a site that is still in Elementor. We just sold for 6 figures, following exactly that. And so it hasn't been changed. It ranks really well on Google, etc. Like it's not been killed by any update, etc. So it's like you can make good money and build great sites still with the solutions that we have in the authority site system. But we also need to acknowledge their limits and what it costs to build a site like that, which is performance. And it's something that once you get to a higher level, you need to start caring about.
There's a trade-off with every single tool,
exactly.
every single tech stack you have. So essentially, what you're saying here is that when you go to generate blocks, you're getting cleaner code, which is going to help your site load faster and tick all these Core Web Vitals boxes.
Yeah.
But that comes at the expense of it's a lot harder to actually use and build stuff if you're used to using Elementor or
but the thing
similar.
is, like, before there was things you could straight up not do if you didn't write like CSS, for example, and like you needed to go ahead and just write CSS to style stuff. Now with Generate Blocks and GeneratePress, you can do pages without writing code. Like a good case study will be the sales page for this new blueprint for the Core Web Vitals blueprint, because we're putting a link here, and the reason why is because I built to make this page pass Core Web Vitals. I actually built it off Elementor. I have kicked out all the Elementor scripts from that page, and I have built it on Generate Blocks, not GeneratePress. GeneratePress, we're still running Astra as a theme. And that allowed me to just have to avoid, there's an error message in PageSpeed Insights called avoid excessive DOM size, which is, when these page builder do all these divs, etc., and there's like 50 layers of divs on your HTML, and it's crazy. And Google's like, well, your code is super bloated. GeneratePress doesn't do that, Generate Blocks, sorry, and it prevents you from having this error message, which is one of the things that cost you some of these page speed score and the Core Web Vitals scores. So you can do all these things without writing HTML and CSS right now, which wasn't the case before the new version of all the stuff they released. So I'm at this point where I'm like, okay, I'm willing to make the jump personally. And I think the advanced users should be willing to do that because you can still do that within a clickable interface. But I do think it's a little rough on beginners. And case in point as well, there's someone in TAS that tried to switch and was like, oh my God, it's so great, etc. And 2 weeks later, someone's asking, oh, how's that going? And it's like, oh, switch back to Elementor. And that's because it's difficult still. And that's why I made a bunch of videos showing this off as well in the new blueprint, actually, so that people who want to make that jump can make that jump, but you don't have to make that jump to start a new site. I'm trying to be very clear. I'm insisting on this because I know people are still gonna not listen, but yeah, it's like task sites still rank as well.
Okay, so let's talk about plugins and how they affect your performance, because you've been very, very harsh on our team, insisting they don't install plugins to fix every little issue because we end up with too much bloat.
I used to do that.
Yeah,
I used to do a lot.
Why does it make such a big impact on your performance?
I mean, it might not make an impact yet, but the thing is, like, because of the nature of WordPress that it's open source, like anyone just releases a plugin, and they're not necessarily like updated, maintained, etc. for the new versions of WordPress. Because when there's new versions of WordPress, they use like new libraries, etc. and things like that. And so, for example, old plugins that are not updated, they still use an old version of like jQuery and stuff like that. And so WordPress still has to go back and load that stuff because you're running these old plugins and so on. It's a bit terrible, on top of being security issues as well. Like if you have a lot of plugins and they're not updated, there could be an opening to hack your site, which is why a lot of sites get hacked. All plugins are not bad though, and I think the vision of like, if you have too many plugins, your site's going to be slow. It's not necessarily the case. It's just only if these plugins load a bunch of stuff on your pages that you don't need. A big known offender being Contact Form 7, which is a contact form plugin a lot of people use for sites for free, but it does load scripts on all your pages, even if you don't have a contact form on it, for example. And it's pretty annoying. And so what you need to do is you need to audit your site and see which plugins are the worst offenders, and try to maybe replace them or not run with them, etc., so that you can save your resources and achieve better Core Web Vitals and page speed, basically. So you need to be a bit smart about this, not just be like, oh, all plugins are bad, but rather which plugins are affecting my score right now.
All right, so how do I do that?
Funnily enough, you do that with a plugin. So install a plugin to know which plugins are bad for you. There's a free plugin called Query Monitor that you can find on the WordPress repository or just install from your WordPress dashboard. And it just does, I do the whole lesson in the blueprint, but essentially it gives you a bunch of reports. When you load your page, you can see some stuff at the bottom, and it tells you, which plugin loads this script, and then you're like, okay, am I using this plugin on this page, or is it just like adding some bloat, basically? And then once you find the worst offenders, again, you try to either find an alternative plugin, or you just get rid of it, or you just accept that it costs you some speed because you really like this plugin, or you really don't want to get rid of that function, which is something that's going to happen as well. People who hunt perfect page speed at the expense of features on their site, I don't think they're the smartest people optimizing their site. It's all about your site doing what it needs to do so you can make money while getting the best page speed score, not about just cutting everything from your site so that you get a high page speed score. That's not the way, basically.
I've heard you also mention about optimizing code, specifically CSS and JavaScript. Now, I have a basic understanding of what CSS is, some kind of like styling element that you're telling the site what color or what size to make your H1 so that when you put the HTML in, it pulls on that to decide how to display it.
Yeah.
I think that's what it is. JavaScript, on the other hand,
it gets a bit more complicated, but yeah.
JavaScript, on the other hand, I don't have a clue. What is it? How does this affect our performance?
JavaScript is like the programming of your site, right? So that HTML is not programming. It's a markup language, which means, like between a paragraph, you just put these little piecings and it tells your browser, ta-da, this is a paragraph. Or like H1 around H1s, and ta-da, this is an H1, right? So it doesn't program it. There's no logic, right? There's no thinking. It's just like telling you what things are. JavaScript is the thinking, the logic, the if this, then that of your website. So it's like it does a lot of things. Like for example, it could just be loading some files depending on what you need on the page, so it doesn't load everything all the time. If this element is on the page, then do this. If it's not, then do that, etc. So that's what JavaScript is, right? But these files are usually some of the biggest on your site with your images. So these are the ones you're probably looking at when you're looking at your loading speed quite a lot. And some of the biggest offenders here are ads, actually. Ads load a lot of JavaScript. And there's many ways to optimize that. This is like the minifying, but that's not much. And most free services do that in plugins. They just remove the space, the comments, etc. And they just make it a big block of unreadable text for you, but for the machine, it takes a little bit less space. Doesn't save that much, but it's still useful. One thing that's interesting with JavaScript and CSS is that historically, when you were reading about page speed improvement, people would be like, oh, it's much better if you take all your JavaScript and make it in one file, and or like all your CSS and make it in one file, so that you need to connect only once to one file instead of having to do many of them if you need and actually that has changed because there is something called HTTP 2. That's basically the new version of HTTP that now doesn't really slow down your site if you have multiple of these connections. It kind of makes more sense to just load the things you need in the order that you need rather than try to load everything at once. It actually makes your site faster. So most PageSpeed plugins will have this option to like try to put these files together. So not only do these things create bugs, but if you have a pretty good hosting, that most good hostings now have HTTP 2, if you use something like Cloudflare, you can also trigger that. You actually are better off not ticking that option. So it's a bit of a trap in PageSpeed actually. So you can do that. The other thing that you can do with CSS is that that is really quite useful is critical CSS, which means taking the CSS of elements above the fold on your page and put it inside the HTML directly. So you can write CSS in HTML instead of loading it from an external file. But what is good is if you take only the part that is above the fold and put that, then essentially your above the fold part, which is your largest contentful paint, is going to load faster because it's not going to require to load an external file. And then the rest can load from an external file. And so critical CSS is quite powerful. There is a service that costs $10 a month normally that does it called criticalcss.com. But plugins like WP Rocket also do it for you, and they do it pretty well. I haven't run into any issues, and that saves. That is one of the like real optimizations, not like minifying, etc. For JavaScript, there's like a lot of like you can basically lazy load it. You can tell it to load after your HTML and CSS have loaded, which means like you see the content on your page, then things like ads and more interactive elements load after, and usually Google, excludes this from the measuring. It's a bit more complicated than that, but I'm simplifying, right? It pushes it away. If you push it away, this will not affect your page speed as much, and this will give you much better scores, basically. And so you have a bunch of ways to optimize these files, and we talk a lot about it in the blueprint, basically. But it's you can preload some of the files as well. So if you have stuff above the fold that really needs to load, you can preload it before everything else. You can do
Is this all
basically.
with WP Rocket, by the way, or how does that fit in?
There's a bit of that with your CDN as well, but also WP Rocket. So
what does WP Rocket do?
WP Rocket is historically a caching plugin, but they've done a pretty good job at kind of like pivoting towards all these metrics that Google cares about, like Core Web Vitals, etc. So they help you solve quite a few of the lingering issues that you have once you have done your, the core level of like, your theme, your web, your hosting, etc. optimization. They help you with a lot of that stuff. You need to set it up properly. It's not always super obvious, but when you do, they do a pretty good job, basically. And they help you with a lot of this kind of stuff together with like some settings on your CDN you're able to get. That's like a lot of the secret on like how I get really high page speed scores and Core Web Vitals. So when it comes to CDN, here is my understanding of what it is. This may be completely wrong, but the time it takes a user to fetch details of your website, images, whatever, off of your server, if you're in London, they're in Sydney, that takes a long time versus if your server is in Melbourne and they're in Sydney, it's a much shorter distance. So CDN spreads the data around the world in different data centers in order for them to have a shorter access time. Is that right? Yeah.
Okay.
And I mean, it's not really. I mean, kind of, but it's like, first of all, historically CDNs, there's multiple setups. There's like the reverse proxy, there's the traditional CDN, etc. Like a traditional CDN would be you change in your HTML the URL of your images to point to another server, actually. So in this case, Cloudflare or Bunny CDN, whatever. Cloudflare is a reverse proxy, actually, so usually not. But in general, what CDNs do is they make a copy of your largest files to a server that is closer to your visitor physically than your initial server was. So if my server is in New York, someone's trying to load my site in Melbourne, it's very likely the CDN company will have a server either in Sydney or in Singapore, and then that big image file, for example, can load just from Singapore, which, because physical distance does matter on the internet, the internet is pretty fucking good. But if you add physical distance, if you play any games, with the ping rate, it does matter, and so it will influence your page speed. And because of the way Google is measuring Core Web Vitals, it's quite important because this 28-day average number I told you, it's based on Chrome data, which means that if you get visitors from all around the world, even if you have really, really good metrics in the US, but you get a bunch of visits from India or whatever, it's gonna, plummet your score. And that's why a lot of people are like, oh, I don't know, it worked quite well in the lab, but it doesn't work now. It's because you actually need to optimize for where your visitors are. And that's where CDNs can be quite good help with that.
How much does it really improve your performance score, though?
It depends a lot of where you started from, right? Because, as I said, CDNs serve your files from their server, some of your files, and some of those files go, like the HTML is usually fetched directly from your actual server because it's such a small file. It's just text. And so if you had a shitty hosting, if you had a really, really cheap hosting, or if you're on an overcrowded server and then you have a really good CDN, then it's very likely that their server is much more performant than your hosting. Therefore, you get a massive jump. Whereas if you have a really, really good hosting and you buy a shit CDN, you might actually get lower performances, right? So it's like, it really depends where you start from. But a lot of CDN companies are now outperforming hosting companies in terms of speed of transferring data, etc. Most of the performance focused on something about Bunny. I really like Bunny CDN. Cloudflare as well. I use Cloudflare APO as well. And I'll talk about both in the blueprint. They use these NVMe SSDs, which are like the new generation of SSDs, which tends to retrieve your file faster on the hard drive, which then it means it starts transferring faster, which means in the end your score is better, basically. And so while most hosting companies still run on first generation SSDs, so you're talking like these NVMe SSDs, they transfer data at like 3,000 megabits per second, and a first gen SSD will transfer at 300 megabits per second. So you're talking 10 times faster transfer speed. It doesn't mean you get 10 times better page speed score because it's just one element retrieving the file of the whole transaction that it needs to be transferred through the internet. It's the same internet, so this doesn't compress by having a better hard drive. And then it's the ISP of the people. So it helps a bit, but overall CDNs, if you get international traffic, you kind of have to do it. If you're like, if you're like a pizza shop in New York and you have a hosting company in New York, it's like, I don't think you need a CDN. You just put the free version of Cloudflare and it's good enough, But most people who listen do have international sites that like do reviews and stuff. And in that case, you probably want to look at a CDN.
Okay. So when it comes to site speed, I've heard a lot of people complain that their ad setup, AdThrive or Mediavine or whatever, has a big impact on it. Why is this, and how can people address this with Core Web Vitals in mind without sacrificing RPM?
And let's just talk about what people actually use. So people who listen to this podcast, they use Ezoic, they use AdThrive, they use Mediavine, right? They use one of these three, most likely. But most of these meta ad networks work the same. The way they get you these much higher RPMs than you would get from AdSense is that they put a lot of networks in competition with each other, right? So they just like, there's like 20, 30, 50 bidders on your impressions, and then whichever bids the highest ad when the page loads is the one that's loaded. But for this to happen, they actually need to prepare to load any of these, which means they might have 50 JavaScript files of 50 networks loading on your website, so that they can load the one that actually is needed when the page loads. And so they do add a lot of JavaScript files on your site. And they used to be big offenders of the cumulative layout shifting, where like the ad change is not appearing, and then it loads last and it just expands, and it just like you click on the ad instead of clicking at the bottom. So they used to really mess up with general page speed and cumulative layout shift. Cumulative layout shift is actually a pretty simple fix that most networks have done now, which is they need to give the height and the width of the ad that they're about to load on the page so that it reserves that space in white and it doesn't move the page. So now it's pretty easy to get green cumulative layout shift. If you need to go in the options of these ad networks, so I show some of them in the blueprint as well. And then if you trigger that, then usually you can solve that. Then in terms of the JavaScript, what you need to do is you need to defer them. You need to delay them to the end of loading. It's a bit of a tricky one, and I would not go too fast on that, because if you defer them too much, or like depending on how it's set up, sometimes you pay per page view, but like let's say because you have so many, it takes like 15 seconds to do everything. It happens, right? If someone stays less than 15 seconds on your page, you literally are not going to be counting as having a page view, and you will not get paid. So you could tank your earnings by doing this wrong, which is why I tend to do it slowly and kind of like, you run the PageSpeed Insight and you get like that list of all these JavaScript files they load. And I tend to like add them slowly and kind of like, I'm like, okay, let me add these 3, and then let's look at my earnings tomorrow, see if I tanked or not, and kind of like over time, add them until I've went through the whole list. It is a slow process if you want to be safe with your earnings, so you need to be a little careful. You could try to just throw everything and see what happens, but because it's not like, you don't need to solve Core Web Vitals in this minute, then I'm willing to just take my time and actually do it slowly a little bit every day, basically.
Okay. So is there anything else that people need to know about Core Web Vitals before we wrap up then?
I think we touched on a lot of the points that we talk about in the blueprint. Obviously, I actually do it in real life in the blueprint and show how every settings and everything. So it's a little bit more in depth, definitely. But now after that, it really depends on people's setup and depends on people's willingness to. I think design is an important one that I wanted to talk about as well, right? So you remember when I talked about largest contentful paint, when I was like, oh, it can be an H1 or it can be an image or it can be a background or something like that. And I also said that mobile is quite hard to optimize. Like it's a quite harsh test. And very often, we didn't talk about images, by the way. We should talk about images. But very often, it's easier to change your layout of your page so that, for example, your largest contentful paint is a text element rather than an image, because just text loads faster and you just need to preload your fonts usually to get a good score. And so I recommend, and a lot of big sites do that. Like if you check all the .dash sites, etc., they do that a lot. For example, if your featured image is picked up to be the largest contentful paint, make it a bit smaller, make your H1 a bit bigger, or even just remove it from mobile, for example, just so that you get that, Google tells you in a PageSpeed Insight, it's like, this is the largest contentful paint that we're looking at. Like it's worth tweaking your layout very often on mobile to get better scores. And that's one thing that people try to like tweak their caching plugin, etc. Sometimes it's design as well. Like you design for performance too. You don't just like tick some boxes,
So what do we need to know about images then?
Okay, image optimization is an interesting one because it has gone through a long process as well. Where before people would just like drag and drop any image on there, maybe optimize on Photoshop or something, like try to reduce the quality on Photoshop. Then we've had plugins, things like EWWW and Smash It, Short Pixel, and a bunch of other that would on WordPress, you would upload your image on WordPress, it would just like connect to the API and then re-upload the image on WordPress that has been, reduced by like 70% or something. It would be the same size, right? So if I upload like a 5,000 pixel wide image, it's still going to give me a compressed 5,000 pixel wide image. And the thing is like, the internet exists on a lot of screen sizes these days, right? It's like I'm looking at you, I have a big 4K screen in front of me. I need big images when I load pages, otherwise it's going to look blurry. But when I actually don't have a very big phone, so when I'm on that phone, I need probably a 700 pixel wide image, something like this. It's probably good enough. And so the way it works now is it works together with CDNs. Sometimes as a different service, sometimes as part of your CDN service. And they're able to actually look at the size of the screen that's loading the page, because that's some metadata that you can get. And then on the fly, let's say I had that 5,000 pixel wide image. They're like, oh, this phone only needs a 700 pixel wide image. What it does is not only, it just goes and take that 5,000 pixel and just resizes it to 700 pixel, and then it optimizes it, and then it loads it on the page, like on the fly for people who are loading the page right now. And what it does, it gives you a much smaller file, because obviously from 5,000 to 700 pixel, it's going to be a much, much, much smaller file. And so you're able to maximize your page speed on every device, regardless of the screen size. And so like it's a quite important one, because as I said, JavaScript and images are pretty much the biggest files you're loading on a classic WordPress page, basically. So that's, I go over that as well quite a bit in there. And then there's like image formats as well. So like, JPEG and PNG, and then now people use WebP, and then some new formats actually that are coming out from Google that you want to optimize for. But it's not so simple, because you can't upload WebP images on WordPress. It's not compatible. So you need your external service to do it for you, etc. So it's a bit of a hassle, but a lot of services do a pretty good job for you. A lot of them are buggy too. Like I did use short pixel adaptive images, for example. My intention was to do the blueprint with them. And then I got so many bugs, because I said that you don't want to lazy load your images when they're in this largest contentful pane, because it's going to affect your first input delay, basically. And so and literally short pixel adaptive images would not, I would literally tag it like don't lazy load, etc. I would not do it. It would do it. It would still lazy load. It would still kill my scores, for example. And so like there's several services that don't do what's on the tin, and that's why I tested a bunch of them. And actually I'm using Bunny Optimizer now, actually together with the CDN. It works pretty well.
Okay, great. So anything else you want to talk about, or shall I tell everyone about this lovely offer which we have available right now?
Tell them.
So the Core Web Vitals Blueprint, it's available now. We just released it yesterday, in fact. And we have a special 75% launch discount. So that's only available for the next 3 days until Thursday evening at midnight. So if you want to grab that, get it now, basically, because this is your last chance. And as usual, it comes with free lifetime updates. It comes with a 30-day money-back guarantee. So if you don't like it for any reason, or you can't get results from it, then we'll give you your money back. No hassle. What else do we have in there as well? Oh yeah, so we've actually reached out to all of the tool companies which we recommend in the course, and we've negotiated exclusive discounts. So you can actually save quite a bit of money if you use these tools just by following the discount links in the course as well. So you can kind of like make quite a lot of your money back that way. Anyway,
especially if you use multiple sites, if you do it on multiple sites.
Yeah.
People who have agencies, etc. I think it's quite useful.
Some of our Authority Hacker Pro members have been helping us beta test this out, and they've gotten some pretty good results as well. I saw one site go from a 53 to a 99 score, and another go from a 23 to a 97 score. And these guys implemented it in like 2 or 3 days, it seemed. So it doesn't have to be a huge piece of work to solve Core Web Vitals. If you follow the blueprint, you can get it done quite fast. Especially if you have relatively simple affiliate sites. Obviously, more complex sites may have more considerations to factor in there. One other thing which Gael's done is he's gone through and he's mapped out every single error message, every single warning in the PageSpeed Insights tool. And he's provided a solution for how you can solve that to improve your score, to make that go away. So whatever your tech setup, whatever plugins, whatever hosting, however your site is currently built, all you need to do is figure out what those are, follow the instructions, and you'll solve it.
I wanted people to not have to watch every video. I was like, I can see how my voice could be annoying to them. So I just decided to save them the pain and let them just go directly to what they want to solve right now. And everyone's happy, basically.
And while this can all seem quite technical, even to me still, you've created this blueprint so that site owners who are not developers and who don't really understand CSS from PHP, from CDN, from all this kind of stuff can still follow along, implement it, and get a good score, basically.
I know a lot of people teach PageSpeed, but like it's not very practical in the sense that they're willing to sacrifice parts of their site they probably shouldn't, that will cost them money. Like, I'm not going to tell you to turn off ads because it costs you some page speed. No, just make the money and then just like, spend some of that money you made into improving your page speed, and like, let me show you exactly what to do. That's why I did a case study site as well, right? It's like, what you didn't say is that this blueprint, at least like a bit more than half of it is me taking a site of ours that was already in the page speed score, and take it all the way to pretty much perfect 100, and showing exactly each setting, each click, everything. And so if you have seen the auto-resize system or anything in H Pro, it's very much in that same vein. It's very easy to follow, and even if you don't know how to use a console or something, you can use that. It's all clicks and there's no code to write, basically. That was the goal.
Okay, so we know that this is going to be a ranking factor. And if you're in a competitive niche, or if you're in the IAM niche, this is going to be pretty essential, I think, to at least not have a bad score in. And you may want to use this to get a leg up on your competition. So go check out that blueprint now. 75% discount for the next 3 days. We'll put a link in the description of the video, or you can go to authorityhacker.com/Core Web Vitals, and you can check it out there. If you have questions about Core Web Vitals from this show, leave a comment on the YouTube post that goes along with this video, and Gael will be answering questions for the next week or so in there too.
More than usual, yeah.
We'll be back in another couple of weeks with another episode from Gael and myself. So thanks for listening, and we'll see you then.
Bye.
Sorry, my dog's barking. Can you hear him?
It's okay.
1 sec, let me just go check.
Put some tranquilizer or something. You have like a tranquilizer gun, and
Probably saw another dog walking past the door or something. Okay.
Uh-huh.